the Power of One. Today, I will be speaking with Catherine Bacharach, the founder of Northwest Victim Services. Catherine has paved the way for a lot of the community-based agencies in the city of Philadelphia. Catherine is a legend. She is amazing, and she is my shero. Welcome to the show, Catherine. Ms. Bacharach, please tell me where you worked in the 80s when you noted that victims of crime were coming to you and there were little resources in the city of Philadelphia.
I will make it as short as possible. It's a little bit complicated. I had been working for a federally funded program in Germantown that was called the Citizens Local Alliance for a Safer Philadelphia. And the funding ended. And actually, for a couple of months, I was on unemployment. And the director of the Northwest Interfaith Movement, which was then located up in West Mount Airy, approached me and asked if I would help develop a program there. We started it in 1981 in the early part of the year, and it was initially called the Community Safety Program. It kind of segued into more and more victim services, although we were helping with a lot of community organizing. And we started working initially with the 14th Police District in Germantown.
Okay, so how did you begin the process of starting to serve victims of crime?
We did a lot of community outreach. We had a wonderful advisory board that represented a lot of different neighborhoods and a lot of different areas of expertise. We did a lot of meetings in communities, East, West Mount Airy, Germantown, East Germantown, to find out what the needs were. And in those days, creating access through the police department was somewhat limited. We were able to develop that later, and I can tell you more about that. But we worked with the municipal court system to develop a presence at the preliminary hearings at the 14th Police District, so that we were providing direct services to victims who came into the courtroom.
And that was under Interfaith?
It was under the Northwest Interfaith Movement.
Okay.
We continued working with them for a number of years under their umbrella. And in 1986, the same group of people who were serving as the advisory board became the board of the Northwest Interfaith Movement. And we set up a nonprofit and got nonprofit status from the IRS. And that was the point at which we moved out from under the umbrella of the Northwest Interfaith Movement. And by that point, we had expanded our services to cover the entire Northwest section of the city. So it was at that point, it was the 39th, 14th, 5th, and 35th police districts. And we expanded the preliminary hearing service to 3 days a week at Broad and Champpost at the 35th Police District as well. We had, prior to starting the program, actually, I had developed a very good relationship with the district attorney's office. And Ed Rendell was the district attorney at that point. So he both created kind of a liaison with the office, and also a number of our board members actually were assistant district attorneys, and a number of them were police officers and then neighborhood representatives.
So when was Northwest Victim Services born?
Technically, it was born in 1986.
Okay.
But I consider it to have been born in 1981 because that's when the program started. We just kind of changed our name and moved into a different office in 1986. So we're celebrating our 40th anniversary, Melanie.
And I love that you said we, because I talk about you all the time when I'm doing interviews and everything. I'm saying, this young lady from Northwest Services, Catherine Bacharach, is up. Listen, I got that elevator speech down.
Okay, okay.
I give you your props all the time. So now when Northwest Victim Services was born, were you the executive director?
I was, my job title changed every year, it seems. I started out as the coordinator and I functioned as the director. And then when we became Northwest Victim Services, obviously I was the executive director.
Okay. Now, when you first started under Northwest Victim Services, when you branched off on your own, how did you receive funding and what services were you offering to victims?
Funding was the real challenge in those days because there wasn't, I'm sure it still is, but there was no clear funding stream for victim services. And in fact, it's kind of interesting because we all, including the board, started this program really in response to a community need. And it was, 2, 3, 4 years later that we realized that we were part of a national trend, but we didn't realize that at the time that we were starting it. The first government funding that we got actually was through the municipal court of Philadelphia. And that was probably through Ed Rendell's help. Okay. Judge Joseph Clancy was the president judge. He knew what we were doing at the preliminary hearings. He was supportive of that. And he somehow created a funding stream to help us. That was later moved to the district attorney's office. Huh? And when other programs in other sections of the city started to develop, that fund was made larger so that other programs could be eligible. But we did direct solicitations, we did an annual appeal, we applied to foundations, churches helped us. It was sort of any which way we could, and it worked.
Well, that was excellent. So when you started Northwest Victim Services, were there many victim-based agencies that were helping victims in the city of Philadelphia? Because now today in 2021, there are multiple victim-based agencies, which is good.
Right.
But take me back to the 80s. Was it just Northwest Victim Services in the city of Philadelphia that was helping victims?
Yeah, there were citywide organizations like Women Organized Against Rape, mm-hmm. and Women Against Abuse. Okay. And we realized very quickly in our work that it was the other crime victims, the victims of neighborhood robberies and shootings and stabbings and burglaries who weren't receiving services. So we work closely with Women Organized Against Rape, making referrals to them on those cases, and we focused on the neighborhood cases. At some point, and it probably was around 1984, Ed Rendell, who was then the district attorney, approached us and said, would you consider becoming a citywide agency? And we discussed it at a board meeting, and to a person, every single person on that board said, we are effective because we are neighborhood based, because we work with local churches, we work with local neighborhood organizations, we work with local business associations. That's not going to work on a citywide basis. We will lose that relationship. So we offered to help to share our kind of model and to help groups in other parts of the city develop their own programs. So I actually worked as a consultant with the district attorney's office, probably for maybe 8 to 10 months at least, 1 or 2 days a week, working with with other parts of the city to help them develop programs. It also was the same time that the district attorney's office was beginning to hire victim advocates to work within the office. So I did some of the training for those folks as well.
Wow, you are just a legend, Catherine. I'm telling you. Now, going back, was Northwest Victim Services always housed in the Germantown area of Philadelphia?
We were in Summit Church in West Manary when we were working with Northwest Interfaith Movement. And when we became Northwest Victim Services in 1986, we moved to St. Peter's Episcopal Church at Wayne and Harvey. So I think since then, all of the offices have been in Germantown.
Okay. I remember going to that location with my mother, and remember that location was robbed at one point, and they had like ransacked the church, and it was just horrible. In my mind, I remember saying, like, my mom is helping victims, and somebody actually came in and they did it in a church. But I was, in high school at that time, so that's how long I've been associated with Northwest. Yeah. So was it hard to get the buy-in from all 4 police districts in the Northwest section of Philadelphia?
It was a challenge initially. It also was a time, I think, in the history of the Philadelphia Police Department when the leadership and a lot of the younger educated people who were coming up through the department into leadership positions had become interested in community policing and in working with neighborhoods. So we were very fortunate in connecting with some of those people. And they were at all command levels. I have a lot of heroes from my Philadelphia days. And one of my heroes is Randy Urquhart, who was the community relations officer in the 35th district. He also was president of Concerned Black Men. He was a wonderful, wonderful person. And sadly, he died of cancer much too early. But Randy was a huge advocate. He was out in the community all the time, making connections with people. And I think teaching a lot of his commanders. And then people came into command positions. Bill Berkman, who later became chief of detectives for the city, became captain of the 35th district. Willie Williams actually was the inspector at one point. And some of those people, including Bill Bergman, then came onto our board of directors. So what I noticed actually is that in the very early years, I had to go to them every time there was a change in command, introduce myself, talk about the program. This is what we do. This is how we can make your life easier. And then after a few years, when a new command person came in, they were coming to us. And that was an important change.
It does make a difference. You have made my life easier in that aspect, because all of the victim assistance officers in the Northwest section of Philadelphia are dynamic. I speak to them every day.
Yeah.
And all 4 police districts are dynamic. The inspector, like, I can contact them on a weekend in the evening, and they're giving me the information that I need to be able to serve victims. So for that, I thank you so much, because not all community-based agencies have that great relationship.
Right. Yeah. And the introduction of the victim assistance officers, and there were crime prevention officers as well, was a huge step forward. And being able to work with those people on a regular basis was enormous. I don't know whether you're still doing it, but during those years, we had a quarterly meeting in our office of all of our staff, the victim assistance officers, the crime prevention officers, representatives of the DA's office, probation and parole. I mean, they were huge meetings, but they were wonderful mechanisms for developing a relationship and getting work done.
That is awesome. And we don't do that now, but I think that is dynamic because then the lines of communication are open and we're all transparent and we all know that we're coming together to serve victims, witnesses, and community members affected by crime. But no, we don't do that now. I know the victim assistance officers now and the community relations officers, they do have, I'm not sure whether it's quarterly or monthly, but they do have their meetings.
Right.
And it's usually, to my understanding, at the police academy.
Right.
So, yeah, which is good. So how long were you the executive director for Northwest Victim Services?
I was there, if you consider 1981 to 1994.
Okay.
And leaving Northwest Victim Services and leaving Philadelphia was very traumatic for me. It was a very mixed bag, but we moved back to Connecticut because of my husband's job and also because we were caring for my mother. So it was, I'd like to say a few more things about some of the heroes, and I'm sure you have heroes
I
in your
do.
work as well.
Please share your hero.
People who were just astounding.
Yes.
I mentioned Randy, I mentioned Bill Bergman. Bill Danks was a detective at Northwest Detectives. He later became a homicide detective. He was on our board of directors. He did volunteer training for us multiple times. And he was remarkable in his interaction with crime victims. He was present, he was supportive, and much of that work that he was doing was during a period when his youngest daughter, Katie, was dying of a rare disease.
Oh, wow.
And I look back on that and say what he did was just remarkable. There were neighborhood leaders in Logan and Olney and Lower Germantown who were dealing with enormous drug problems in their communities. And for them to have been able to stand up to those problems and continue organizing was just remarkable.
Mm-hmm. So tell me how you came to meet Patricia Payne.
Patricia Payne probably was a volunteer with the organization before she became a board member.
Yeah.
And that was, that was the sort of way it happened with people. Dorothy Odoms, who is still alive at the age of 95, in what I used to call the box in the 14th district, was a volunteer. She was a community leader in the 35th district. And she joined us as a part-time advocate for the elderly. So there were a lot of movements like that between people who were initially volunteers and moved into other positions.
Now, when you were the executive director, how many employees did you have?
We had probably a total of 5 employees.
Okay.
And again, it was sort of depending on how much money we could raise and how much money we had. Dorothy was the victim advocate. She was very part-time. Betty Cameron was the full-time victim advocate. We had a court advocate and we had an administrative assistant and I. So it was sort of all hands on deck, as the way it
Right.
probably still is. People stepped in and they took care of things. And I remember that we had lots of phone calls that came in at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And someone always stepped up. It was me, it was another staff person to meet those needs.
Do you remember about how many victims a year you would serve, would there be a decline in like 1986, 1997, 87? Did you see an increase in the summer, decrease in the winter? Do you remember that?
I don't specifically. One of the things that I did in the 4 or 5 months between my announcing my departure and actually leaving was to go through all of the files, which at that point were paper files, and weed out and destroy most of the files that we knew we wouldn't need in future. And I was just astounded at the numbers. I don't think there were a lot of changes from year to year.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with some of the people, we had one interaction, maybe at a preliminary hearing at the court service. And then with other people, we had multiple phone calls and in-person interface. I think one of the most effective things we were able to do, because we had one-to-one contact with people and really got to understand the system, was that we could be an advocate for changes within the system. So at one point, for example, a group of us from a lot of different programs in Philadelphia worked with legislators in Harrisburg to improve the Crime Victims Compensation Act. There were a lot of staffing problems. There were coverage problems. There were problems with taking a very long time to settle claims. So we were able to do that. The courtrooms at that point also were in town, in City Hall, and they were miserable. There were no waiting areas, and victims and witnesses were often waiting out in the hallways because they were sequestered and sitting right next to the defendants in the case or the defendant's family. So we worked with the court system to create at least a temporary space that would be a victim witness waiting room until the new courthouse was built. So we were, through the Philadelphia Coalition for Victim Advocacy, really, we were able to do those things.
Okay. Now, you said, did you have a hand in, or do you remember the beginning of the Victims Compensation Program?
No, the Victims Compensation Program at the state level was in place, but it was very inefficiently run. And there were a lot of needs that it didn't cover. So we were able to work with other Philadelphia groups and groups statewide to advocate for improvements in that program. One other thing that we did that I remember so clearly, and a lot of people from the Philadelphia Coalition Advocacy, the courts were able to identify a room on the first floor of City Hall that we could use as a victim witness waiting room in cooperation with the district attorney's office. But it was miserable. It was filthy. It hadn't been painted for years. And we said, could it be painted before we occupy it? And they said, maybe next year. So we said, well, what if we do it? And they said, well, you might get in trouble with the union, but if you come in at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, after everybody's gone home, with paint and brushes and rollers, you could probably do it. We did.
Wow.
We just did it.
That's amazing. I thank you for all that you have done, because you paved the way for me. You've made it easier for me to connect with the police districts, not only in the Northwest section of Philadelphia, but throughout Philadelphia. You've made it easier for me to be able to advocate for my victims, for me to be able to have a great relationship with the district attorney's office. And for that, Catherine, I am truly truly grateful. It is amazing to be called an executive director for Northwest Victim Services, for me to follow in your footsteps and for me to follow in the footsteps of my mother, Patricia Payne. This is truly, truly an honor. I thank you so much for what you've done for victims and witnesses in the city of Philadelphia. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Melany, and good luck in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. I am so proud to be the Executive Director for Northwest Victim Services, to follow in the footsteps of Catherine Bacharach, to follow in the footsteps of Patricia A. Payne. I will do all that I can to serve those in need in the Northwest section of Philadelphia. Thank you for joining me today. Peace and blessings.